All right. Okay, we are live here. A very good morning to Tim and Mark Gorkin. All right,
Good morning.
yeah, so Tim is joining in as usual from Texas, Albuquerque, and then Mark is joining us from uh, Philadelphia.
No, Columbia, Maryland.
Columbia, all right. I'm so sorry.
That's near Baltimore and D.C.
Eastern,
There
okay.
you go.
Not far,
There you go.
not that far from Philadelphia. But I just got to ask Tim, how are you handling the hurricane?
Oh, I'm not in the hurricane. I'm in a place called Albuquerque, New Mexico, which has mountains and mountains and thousands of miles. Yeah, we'll get a little bit of it, but mostly the weather comes from California and up through Mexico across us. So when we have 40 miles of wind, there's always a tornado the next day in Oklahoma. So yeah, we're protected.
We got to improve Kumar's understanding of the geography of the United States.
We'll get there as long as we learn the geography of India at the same time.
That's only fair.
No, I do follow news, especially when the elections are there. I just love elections. Any country, I love elections.
This election is creating a lot of stress for people. Let me tell you, this election is creating a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Which also, how is it going, by the way, Mark? How's the election campaign? How's the election campaign that you see it? How is it going?
Oh, it really shows the divisiveness in the United States between what they call the red states, which are more the Republican states, and the blue states, which are the Democratic states. And there's very different perceptions of the world based on that distinction. And some people love Donald Trump, and a number of people despise him.
You know what's funny, Mark?
Yeah.
That was what the country was built on hundreds of years ago. The English were frustrated with the United States because they come in and they go to a bar and they'd have these guys arguing, and it was like, you guys are fighting, and the people of the United States, no, we're debating. We're coming up with great ideas, and we're finding out common territory so we can figure out these hard problems.
I hope it evolves to that now.
Well,
right now, I don't see that yet.
It always has, and that's why we call the United States the Great Experiment.
Okay.
It is the Great Experiment.
It's interesting. The other day, me and Tim were talking about the debates, why people have started shouting in debates. I mean, the moment you start shouting, the debate ends, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, the paradigms has changed with time, I believe. But yeah, anyway, we will talk all this, Mark, for the people who has joined in. Let me introduce you, Mark Gorkin. He is a certified clinical social worker. He can actually help you manage your stress. I mean, he has been doing it well. Myself and Mark has actually executed one assignment for a school last year, where Mark has given a 2-day workshop for the teachers to manage their anger management. Was it anger management, Mark?
Yeah, there was stress and conflict, like in any organization, the issues are going to come up.
I will certainly ask on that as well. Yes. So I'll ask you this question about your experience but before we can start that, if you can help our viewers and all of us to let us know about yourself, how the journey started, what you exactly do, what's your interest.
Well, going to social work graduate school, you really are trained in psychology and human interaction. I think that's very important in not just what's in the head, but what happens between two people once they start talking and arguing and sharing ideas and sharing different points of view. And of course, how our family upbringing and our cultural upbringing impacts the way we see the world and we see other people. And so it's a very rich field. Truth be told, my family was quite an interesting psychological laboratory. There was a lot of craziness in it, and so I had to learn how. I needed to take social work classes and psychology classes to make sense of all of it. And you know what? Most of us have come from families where, there are going to be a lot of issues we have to get a better handle on if we're going to really be able to establish our own path of integrity and passion. So this is all very related to not just your personal life, but your career path, how you interact with people that personally, professionally. Anyway, but what really did it is I was working on a doctoral dissertation down in New Orleans, and I sort of had an experience that really fired up my creative brain cells. But sometimes as a doctoral student, you shouldn't be too creative. You should be more practical. Unfortunately, I wasn't very practical. And as I called it, that experience is when academic flash dancing whirled to a burnout tango. And
Right.
And I dropped out, burnt out, had to deal with the feelings of being a failure and the shame and the frustration and where do I go now? But you know what? Ultimately, that experience was what I needed. I needed to let go of academia so I could find my real creative voice and become the stress doc. And within a year, I was doing radio and TV in New Orleans.
Wow.
So sometimes you have to, fall down, hit the bottom before you can begin to see new possibilities. And I'll talk about, what I call the 6 R's of burnout recovery. And I think your audience will find that helpful. So it was really that experience of burning out in the doctoral dissertation that I saw the silver lining. I became an expert on stress and burnout. And then I started, really writing about it and speaking about it. And this was back in the 80s. So, that wasn't such a common term back then. So I was sort of breaking new ground and people were interested.
People used to take it seriously. I mean, I'm talking about those days. I mean, these days, there's so much of awareness that people actually talk about it. You have social media, you have televisions talking about stress. But I'm talking about the 2 decades back. Was people really taking it seriously?
Well, those that were going through it, just because it wasn't being talked about in the social sort of arena, the social marketplace. Actually, my experience with radio and TV, I got, responses from people, saying, yeah, I can really relate to what you're talking about, Doc, and so it was coming out of the closet, so to speak. It was finally getting some traction, and people were interested.
Wow. Well, I back 2 decades hence. I started
actually 4 decades hence. The 80s.
Wow.
Talking 40 years ago.
So I started just to understand this, I started in my primary career 1991 and 1990. So back in 1980s, was stress prevalent? Or was it just as prevalent, or was it just that we didn't have as much stress, or are we just talking more about stress now?
I don't know, but if you think about the 80s, there was a very, people are uptight about COVID and stressed about COVID. Well, there was something called AIDS and HIV in the 80s that was freaking out a lot of people. So, I think it's always been there. It's how in New Orleans, one of the ways you deal with it is, as they say, is with a go cup. alcohol was a great way of dealing with stress in New Orleans.
Yep.
Not always the best way.
Nope.
And,
Thank you, liquid distraction. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
but I think, it's always been around, but, I think we're starting to acknowledge it and talk about it a little more. I see the prevalence of like 12-step programs that are not just for alcohol and narcotics, but now for all kinds of relationship issues, codependency, adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. I mean, I think it's beginning to, and look at the popularity of let's say someone like Oprah Winfrey. Why is she so popular? Well, she's talking about issues that are impacting. So maybe to Tim's point, the media certainly is putting a greater spotlight on the issue.
Mm-hmm. How do you actually define stress? What is stress?
Basically, stress occurs when you're in a situation that is asking you to respond to a challenge, a loss, a threat. And depending if you feel you have the resources or not to respond to that threat, loss, and challenge, you will either have, if I feel I can handle this, you won't have much stress, or you'll have what's called good stress, just like today. I bet you all of us have a little bit of that performance edge going on, which is what makes our performance even better. If I'm so blissed out or so anxious, I'm gonna blow it. But there's an optimal level of stress that keeps me focused, that keeps my mind sharp, it helps me remember stories that I want to tell, so an optimal level of stress is when we perform at our best. No, the only time you have no stress is when you're 6 feet under. So we don't want that. So, however, if that's threat, loss, and challenge, you can't seem to respond, but it's not going away. Then you start getting what's called hypervigilant. You're always on guard. You're always watching your back. What's going to happen next? And that's when normal or acute stress turns to chronic or distress. And for example, prolonged distress, prolonged chronic stress, we know can lead to medical illness, addictions, depression. It's all the things that if you don't get a handle on the stress, over time, it's going to make you get a handle on it one way or the other.
Stress and anxiety, are they the same, or is there a difference?
Well, I think stress is the larger category. Anxiety is one manifestation of stress, where you tend to, worry about things and expect the worst. And that's a key point. 2 key words, just to simplify things a little bit. Do you have a sense of control in a situation? When you don't, chances are that's going to create some stress. And what often is related to control is how realistic are your expectations. If you keep on having unrealistic expectations, and the third point, do you have this critical judge in your head that says, "Oh, you didn't do it perfectly. You're that's poor show, fella." So control, expectations, and do you have that critical judge operating in your head? Those things.
So there's 2 drivers of stress. There's external, like my company is going through a bunch of layoffs. And then there's perception, and there's my ability to respond to that. And both of them can actually either influence stress in a positive way so I can manage it, or in a negative way so I can't manage it.
And I would add one thing, Tim, because I agree absolutely. Often they say it's not the stress, but it's how you're interpreting the situation, how you're perceiving it, and that's impacting how you're responding to it. Yeah. And the other thing that I would add is especially in the culture, let's say, of the United States, where you're supposed to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, stop being a complainer, don't
Yeah.
share your dirty laundry with anybody. You're supposed to be able to be that lone cowboy or cowgirl that does it by him or herself. And that's really one of the dangers, is when you don't recognize how important it is to reach out and get feedback and get ideas and get sometimes support resources for other people. And that's where some of our cultural values can add to the stress.
So one of these components to actually help us manage the stress is the social networks that we create. And that would actually be very interesting in the current world we live within, where we're not around people all the time. Yeah, that's
And
very
I
interesting.
think this is why I think what we're doing this morning is so important, because we're going to have to connect virtually to more than we ever have before.
Yeah.
Telecommuting.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Mark. In March, all of a sudden, my students took a turn, and it was fascinating to watch. And I got about 3 times the amount of students in my classes, March through now, and I don't know how it's long going to take. And they were full of energy. They were full of excitement. They were commenting to each other. They weren't just asking me questions. And here I was trying to manage a class. And it took me 3 classes to say, what if this isn't me? What if this isn't my students? What if there's something bigger that we're all experiencing and we need to express this energy, or we're all going to, not get anything done? And so I went against the advice of my of the people who I was working with and the advice of my students. And I started for about 5 or 10 minutes, just let them blow off steam so we could get to work. And it seemed to actually manage things a lot better. But I tell you, this is a new world we're in.
I call it the new crazy, not the new normal. This is the new crazy.
Oh yeah, I've been studying these in history, these times when we've had illness, not just illnesses like this, but great upheavals in society, climate change and all these things. And every time that hits, society has to make a change, and there's 1 to 3 decades that everybody feels uncomfortable. And my question to you is, as individuals, how do we actually, not make progress, but how do we just keep afloat when we go through these crazy times like this?
Let me tell you a study that was done, talk about on a smaller scale, but certainly a time of upheaval. Some of you may remember, again in the 80s, when they broke up Ma Bell, the telephone company, right? That was, at least, in the States, and probably had worldwide ramifications. That was shaking up people, in the industry, but especially, with Ma Bell, Belltel. And a woman named Dr. Suzanne Cabasa did a study of the executives, and she found that some of them were, really having a hard time. I mean, this whole was going to have a job, what are the new rules? How do I negotiate? What about my turf? Everything was up for grabs. But some execs seem to be managing this storm, this organizational change storm, well. And she found that there were 4 factors that distinguished the execs that were really having a hard time and the execs that she called the most psychologically hardy. So her concept was psychological hardiness. And there were 4 factors, and I called them the 4 C's of psychological hardiness. First, the most hardy execs had a sense of commitment. Even though they didn't like what was going on, they didn't just tank their, didn't just throw in the towel. They still were doing the work that, with integrity and commitment. But they weren't, as some, staying at work 20 hours, hoping that if I sacrifice my mind and body for the company, I'll be rewarded. That heaven's reward fallacy. And of course, those were the ones that burnt out the most. So they were involved with work, but they also knew they had to connect with their family, their friends, those social networks that Tim talked about. Second, they had a realistic sense of control. They knew this wasn't just another reorganization. This was shaking up the puzzle in a profound way. And so they stepped away from their turf. They didn't just cling, I got to hold on to what I got. No, they were the ones that were able to let go. And how did they let go? They understood the grief process, and they understood the nature of change. It's natural to be anxious, to be angry, to be, when people are pulling the rug underneath your feet, so to speak, changing your whole world. Those feelings are natural. It's the people that can deal with them quickly and honestly and deeply that are the ones that are going to be able to, just like what you said, Tim, you let your students kind of vent to get out their emotions, and then they can focus. Well, if you don't do that kind of grief, you really can't focus. And so these hardy execs were the ones that knew how to grieve. They did it. They weren't ashamed of it. They talked about issues, feelings, and then they were able to let go and step back. And now be in a position, what are my options? What are the trends that I'm beginning to see? They weren't so tunnel vision on just saving my job. They had more opportunities and options. And finally, which also is very important, the most hardy execs that were the ones that were getting regular physical exercise or conditioning. And we know exercise not only stirs up, those endorphins and dopamines, good chemicals that help you. That's not so much a runner's high, it's a runner's calm. These chemicals sort of get you to kind of lower the stress level, kind of slow your mind down. It's a little bit like meditation. That's what you want to do. You don't want that racing mind that keeps you so anxious. Slow the mind down, be able to see a bigger picture. And to me, what's so wonderful about exercise, and now I'm not running anymore, but I walk 1.5 miles, around the lake. So I'm really getting a couple of benefits. I'm fortunate to have a lake in walking distance. When you think about, when I set out on my 1.5 mile walk, what am I doing? I'm creating a beginning and end point for a tangible sense of accomplishment and control. That's part of my success ritual. And then when everything feels up in the air, what do we need? You can't see me pounding my feet, but we need to feel grounded. And so creating a beginning and end point, and something that gives us that sense of control. Remember, we talked about control being one of the key factors when we don't have enough control, feeling really stressed out. Plus, we also know spending time in nature is a way that really both helps quiet the mind, gives us a sense of connection to a larger picture, and is stress relieving. So there are those commitment, control, realistic control, being willingness to confront the emotions involved in change, and regular physical exercise or conditioning. Those 4 C's really determined whether the execs were thriving or barely surviving.
Wow.
Yeah. You talked about the 4C, Mark. Let me ask you this. Is there any Pell's vaccine? I mean, basically, can you inoculate the stress?
I think a lot of people do try to inoculate with stress. It's called using alcohol, using drugs. That's the problem. Now, of course, depending if you've had a good psychiatric evaluation, some people are prescribed medication for stress, anti-anxiety. But even there, you never just want to give a person a pill and send them away. No, you want to give them survival tools. How do you learn to manage your stress? How to learn to set boundaries and say no. In fact, this is really, I have what I call my formula for natural speed. Shall I just jump in, or Tim, Kumar, do you want to make a comment before I sort of go into natural speed?
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. It stands for sleep, priorities, passion, empathy, exercise, and diet. So sleep. Why are they finally saying to medical students and interns and residents, you got to get 6 hours of sleep a night when you're on duty? Very simple. Medical malpractice lawsuits. That's it. You can't function with any kind of clarity and accuracy if you're sleep deprived. So that notion, hey, we're tough, we can go on 2 hours of sleep, we don't know what the impact was on all those patients that they were so macho with. So we know now that in general, if you are being cheap with your need for sleep, watch out. And we also know more and more that long-term sleep deprivation seems to influence the tendency to diabetes, and maybe even Alzheimer's disease, certainly dementia. So this is not a luxury. Getting at least 6, and I would say closer to 7, 8 hours of sleep a night is critical if you want to be a top-notch performer, let alone respect your body's need for health, health issues. Priorities. And I'm going to set priorities in a simple way. How comfortable are you saying no to people? How comfortable are you disappointing when you have to disappoint others? I've had more people say to me, Mark, in workshops, until I learned how to say no, I was living on the edge of stress. Because if you can't say no, if you can't set boundaries, you feel like you always, you always want to be the nice guy or gal. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. You're not speaking your truth. You're not. Someone said burnout's less a sign of failure and more that you gave yourself away. So how do you learn to say no? I'm going to give you some quick tips on saying no. Someone asks you to do something. Let's say a friend, family member. You want to sort of acknowledge their request that it's important. I understand this is important, but right now, with what I have going on my plate, I can't do ABC for you. Maybe I can help you with DEF, or call me back in a day or two and let's, revisit. Things might be different. But if you can't do that, and of course, if people are used to you saying yes and you start saying no, how are they going to react? Are they going to like that you're saying no to them? No, of course not. They're going to try to talk you out of it because they know you've been a soft touch in the past. So the key is not to let them get you caught up in having to justify your no. Because once they, see you trying to explain why you have to say no, they've got you. They've hooked you. You're going to eventually fold. So the key is to basically just reaffirm what you said. As I said, I have these things going on. Maybe I can't help you with, ABC, your initial request. Either I can do something, a little bit, or get back to me in a day or two and let's revisit this. So you have to be clear, precise, short, brief, to the point, and not feel you have to justify your no. Now, with the big boss, when the big boss says the sky is falling down, it's an emergency, drop everything. Yeah, you can't quite say no. However, you can respond in a constructive way. The first thing to remember, emergencies are truly life and death. Everything else can be prioritized. So when he says it's, the sky's falling, I would respond, it's true. This is a really important issue, or we got a serious problem. Because it's so important, help me prioritize so I can put aside some of my other work so I can give this project the time and attention that it needs. See, I didn't just pile his emergency on my plate. Okay, one more thing come to and eventually the plate gets so big enough, if you try to eat all that on that plate, you're going to get indigestion, or the plate's going to get so heavy you're going to drop it. So you did something very important. You didn't buy into, you don't let someone else's false anxiety or false emergency become your anxiety. And by redefining it, I'm taking some control by calling it an important issue or a serious, this is a serious problem. But I'm not saying it's this emergency that the world's collapsing. And I think learning to do that and having the integrity to speak even to the authority figure. But then you also ask, hey, help me prioritize. Do authority figures often have big egos? They like to feel that you're asking them for advice? Oh, they love it, of course. So I think there are ways, if you're strategic and you're aware of these dynamics, that you can exert more influence on the situation than we normally think. So saying no.
Yeah. We talked about people who are stressed. They sort of start taking alcohol, drugs, and all. Let's spend a minute on that, because I see a lot of issues coming on through, a lot of news are there. What do you think? Why do they start taking it? I mean, is it a kind of excuse that they try to try out? Okay, let me try, because they have seen in movies, people taking it, so let me try, and then get addicted. Is this the cycle that gets?
It may start out, a lot of kids, young people, go along with the crowd and they start drinking, and if they're under stress, they might use it more. But also we know that there's a medical component with alcohol, with drugs, that some people are much more susceptible to having what's called an allergic reaction, that some people call alcoholism is like the equivalent of an allergic reaction to the substance. So I can see with me, I take a sip of, I drink a glass of wine, let's say, and maybe I get a little tired, that's, where I've seen and because it's a family, my father had some problems with alcohol. He would get more aggressive and he could be obnoxious. I see my brother, when he drinks alcohol, he doesn't get as loud as my father, but he'll start shooting sort of passive aggressive darts or a little hostile darts. So our body DNA has something to do with how we react to different substances. Unfortunately, it becomes a habit. We like the feeling and it tunes out the anxiety in the short run. Hey, it's working until it doesn't. Because unfortunately, there's what's called habituation. You start getting used to the level of alcohol. If you, at first, maybe 2 drinks was great. It got me that real calm feeling. I'm blissed out. I don't have to worry about. But after a while, 2 drinks isn't enough. Then it's got to be 3, and then it's got to be 5, and that's where eventually the house of cards collapse.
And then it's a loop. then finally you tend to get into more stressed, isn't it? I mean, because if I am addiction, like sometime back we discussed, anxiety is one component which actually leads to stress. Similarly, addiction could be another component which can lead.
People start out thinking drinking will help relieve their stress, and then ultimately it becomes more than stress. It generates a life crisis, almost literally a life and death crisis if it continues long enough. And which gets back to actually, if I continue natural speed, passion, sleep, priorities, passion. I always believe we should have something that we can escape to that's nurturing, that speaks to our soul. For some people, it can be gardening. For other people, it's riding a motorbike. For other people, it's hiking in mountains. Whatever it is that really allows you. One woman in a group that I know does wonderful sewing. She loves to sew. Find something. We used to call it a hobby. I don't know, but find something that really lets you express your true voice.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy. We talk about, that's why are these, Tim, do you want to say something? I see you're responding.
You struck a chord in me when you were saying that, and when you say empathy, all of a sudden I think about emotional intelligence. When I was going to business school, emotional intelligence was a leadership topic, and it seems that in public articles across the internet and in conversations on YouTube all the time, emotional intelligence is almost a human survival mechanism. And I hearken back to the definition of emotional intelligence. It's not just understanding the emotional behavior of individuals, it's understanding my own and my ability to sustain some amount of control over my emotions. And so it's fascinating to see that that's actually not just something that can help me, but it's something that is a mechanism that not just managers and leaders use in business, but it's a everyday part of my tool set to manage anxiety.
And that's another point, links what we were talking before. The danger of alcohol, excess marijuana, is that you're using that to sort of numb your emotions, and you're not learning to regulate your emotions. You're not experiencing them, you're not feeling them, you're not leaning into them, and you can't learn how to manage them.
We have a comment in my part of the world. You have to be tough to live in the West, and that again, that's a distraction. That's a distraction. That's not facing this monster, and we forget that this monster that we call anxiety and stress is something that came from us, and if it came from us, it must be smaller than who we are.
And it has a positive function. It's one of
Yes.
the positive functions of stress is to get your attention.
Right.
If you're numbing it so quickly, you're missing that opportunity to, what's the stress telling me?
Excellent.
What's the stress saying? Hey, Mark, you need to pay more attention on this area. So there's a certain amount of stress that really helps focus us and gets us ready to be a little more courageous, to be a little more open and honest. Yeah, stress is a survival mechanism. It can become, a destructive mechanism when you don't pay attention, or you're just so fixated on it, and you're not really looking at your own internal mechanism. You're now so worried about what's coming at me from the outside, and that's when you become you burn out on that kind of hypervigilance.
Right. One of my friend in a group just asked me when getting attention or carving for something, or I want to be perfectionist. When I get this feeling that I have to become better, I have to become perfection, whatever I do, that can lead to stress as well. Unnecessary stress, because. Yeah. Would you like to comment on this?
Well, but really, why do some of these people have this rigid need for perfection? That's the question. Where is that coming from? And usually it's coming from often an upbringing where someone said you weren't good enough. They were always critical. So you feel just doing good work isn't enough. You've got to be perfect so I won't be criticized. Or pride, I've got to be the best. I've got to be number one. I like the idea of selective perfectionism. Some things I want to be the best. I'll agree. I want to, when I do a workshop or I'm writing something, I want it to be my top notch. But there are a lot of things I don't need to be the best in.
Do you
So,
think society is responsible
let other
somewhere?
people have their moment in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to. I can, and a lot of times what I'm realizing is when you're driven by that perfection, you're never accepting yourself. You're never really feeling comfortable in your own skin. And
True.
when you can't accept yourself and feel comfortable in your own skin, guess what? You can't accept others and relate to them with emotional intelligence. You're going to be judging them. They're not meeting your standards, or whatever it is. You're going to be much more critical of yourself and much more critical of them. And you're missing an opportunity for real give and take intimacy with people.
What role you think society has to play in here? Uh, how society can be responsible for uh, putting up stress and releasing stress. I mean, it can do the both. Coin has its two sides.
Ken, what do you think? You see, I just used a very useful stress maneuver. When you're not sure, ask someone else.
So here's the thing. What you said, Mark, was very prescient, okay? If you look at stress, negative stress tends to look at this tension as an external driven exercise, right? It's a perception that something outside me is telling me I have to or I cannot. But when I have healthy stress, it's something internally driven. It seems to me, and I've been fascinated by some people who seem to have an internal moral compass, and they don't have stress. They have tension, they have excitement, but they don't have stress. They have ownership of I have to be perfect here because they love what they're doing. They're naturally better than anybody else. And so that it seems to be a personal commitment, and it's a conscious commitment to turn this bodily sensation of excitement and tension either for the good of me and therefore the good of rest of society, or for bad. And this is where society can play both the bad role and the good role. Society can say you have to conform, and if it's not for the natural behavior of people, society is going to break people. If society is able, through both culture and politics, put some changes in place, you can't do it fast because people need to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually manage things in a certain way where it raises the personal value and allows people permission and participation in being selective in what they focus on and they build. People have a little more sense of control, and all of a sudden this tension and this excitement is productive, and it's no longer. And this is the problem. It's we look at society and culture and politics as a governing agent, right? And we're pushing back and they're pushing back, and we're pushing back and they're pushing back. But that's not how it works. And we've known this. What it is that creates a crucible. And for about a third of the people in that crucible, they become very powerful. But the rest of the people are broken. Okay. Now, when you have culture and society all going like this, where they're not telling the direction, but they're telling them the motivation and giving people a little sense of control in their direction, you have something different. And in business, we call this the difference between management, where you say, pick a box up there, move it over there, and set it down. You have 15 minutes to do it. And that's what being a manager is. And being a leader is somebody saying, I'm not the smart one in the room. I brought you guys together because you know the details. I have the vision, you know the details. Let's work together and do something great. And so we vacillate in business between these, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we see this in 10, 20, and 25 and 30-year cycles. And corporations who get this right are strong corporations for longer than a century. Now, at the societal level, it's not the objective to be a society for only 100 years. You want to be a society for 1,000 years and 2,000 years. So these cycles have to be smoother, more gradual, and more gentle with their changes. Society has a role in this, but society, I think, now this is just Tim's opinion from what I've studied, has to be more gentle, and it has to be more careful with the direction it goes. It can't turn quick. It cannot turn quick. And it has to understand that society is like a beehive. It's, what's not good for the beehive is not good for the bee. And what's not good for the bee is not good for the beehive, right? But then every bee has to understand what's not good for the beehive is not good for me too. So it's a collaborative effort, and society does play a role in this, but every bee has to also participate.
Let me break it down to a smaller social unit. For example, when I did work with the military, the progressive leaders sort of knew, and these were leadership retreats where senior officers and senior sergeants, especially before like deployment to Iraq, and really needed to have open, honest communication amongst themselves, not protecting their turf, I got to hoard as much resources as I can so I can get, because otherwise they're going to have more resources than me. And do you know what I'm saying? You had to break down that very ultra competitive win-lose kind of thinking. And one of the things that I learned is that, one, they realized sometimes you need people like Tim and myself to be that facilitator, to get systems to learn how to communicate in a different way. They brought me in to create a workshop that really opened up those channels of more honest communication. In the military, they have a term, helmets off meetings. Now, what's a helmets off meeting? Well, you think about in the military, on a helmet, there's going to be rank.
Right.
And so a helmets off meeting the goal is to have no rank in the room, so that theoretically the corporal is even willing to speak up to the colonel. Now, I said theoretically. They knew that it's not easy to create that safe environment where the corporal is really ready to risk. And so they would bring in the stress doc to create an environment where, through different exercises, different, sharing of information, we created an atmosphere where there was this real open helmets off sharing. And I remember the colonel thanking me that this, because I worked with them for like 3 hours, and then they went into their secret meeting to plan, their war strategy. And he said, this was the best meeting we've ever had. People were open. There was less, contentiousness. So that laying the groundwork for that helmets off, where people feel, as Tim was saying, can I have input? Are the people in power really listening to me? Are they really, concerned about my ideas? And a good leader knows, just as Tim was saying, hey, if I want to know what's going on in the trenches, I better talk to those folks.
Yeah, and something else about helmets. Helmets are armor. They're not just rank, but they're armor. And putting a helmet aside is saying, I'm going into the arena and I'm not going to protect myself.
Right.
And
You're
that's
willing to be
scary.
vulnerable.
I'm scared. I'm a leader and I'm going to have to do that. But a leader doesn't protect themselves. A leader doesn't lead with a sword. They lead with a shield. And it's for the guys behind them.
And the more that leaders can be real, show that they don't have to have it all together. What's the message? Hey, I can be real with this colonel because he's not going to judge me. He's not afraid to be real himself. So this is where some of the great leaders are not afraid to project some vulnerability.
Right.
Because that's real courage. Courage is doing the right thing in the face of vulnerability and fear and still not backing away.
Right.
I mean, courage to converse, communicate is what help you to get rid of stress. The more you're gonna keep things inside you, you know. Yeah, I mean, the more you live in a cocoon, you are more stressful. The moment you start spreading it, sharing it with your friends and family, with your mentors, with your peers, colleagues, I think, I mean, it goes out, isn't it?
But the key is finding the right people or the right group to share it with. Because
I have a question on this, Mark.
Okay.
When you say this, so should I wait for the right person to come and hit me, or should I just keep on trying myself? Like, let me see who can actually help me out. Let me discuss. I mean, there's nothing wrong. What do you suggest?
Well, certainly there's nothing wrong with, doing experiments and, exploring. But for example, I use this story. Let's say you want to talk about, someone, about, let's say, a family member that's ill, or maybe, in serious health conditions. And you're talking to the person and they suddenly say, "Oh, I know what you mean. Let me tell you about my grandmother. She's going through all the..." They can't listen. They're so caught up in their neediness. So the key is, can I find someone who can really give and take with me? Because the reality is so many people have a need to share their emotions because they are bottled up. So that's going to be a key, to find a person or a group where they really will give you a chance to share, and then they will take time to share.
Yeah, but you would agree that, you need to share. I mean,
oh, absolutely. I think it's, I think that's, I see it. I'm doing some work with folks in DC who have a pretty hard scrabble life, and just the fact that just a chance to talk about some of the early trauma, some of the issues they're grappling with, the isolation of COVID. It's a blessing. It really is. And I'm helping them make connections with one another. Now they're recovery buddies, stress buddies. That's one thing I really encourage in an organization. Do you have a stress buddy? Someone you can really let your hair down. Now, some of us, it's too late to let our hair down. But someone can you let your hair down with and really, help me talk this out before I put my foot up someone's butt or, in my own mouth. So we need to have a stress buddy sometimes, so we don't just burst into somebody's office and, hit them over the head with a ruler. The point is, so for many reasons, there's a great book called The Power of Two. And it talks about how creativity and innovation rarely happens only alone. It often, whether we talk about the book, the Wright brothers, Lennon and McCartney, the Beatles, he talks about the energy. And it's not two people that are mirror images, but they have some commonalities, like McCartney and Lennon both lost mothers, before they were 19. Obviously they had, musical talent. but they had some real sharp personality differences. But those differences made them creative. For example, John Lennon would confront Paul about, hey, your lyrics are getting sappy and syrupy. And McCartney would challenge Lennon and say, hey, you don't have to be so, try to pretend to be a macho, tough guy. And they both brought out the best in each other. Mm-hmm. And that's what you want, is someone who, understands you, connect, but not be afraid to challenge you a little bit.
True. With respect to the current situation, Mark, COVID has came in, and then the economy slowdown was seen in, I think, all the countries. I think nobody is, I don't see anybody who is not affected with it so far, right? How do you
call it a pandemic? It's
pandemic, yeah.
Everywhere.
What advice would you like to give out to the people who are like, and I totally agree. Many of my friends actually keep me calling in and says, hey, you know what, life has actually taken a 360 ever since the lockdown was imposed. I never ever had a thought that, I had to see my wife's faces. I mean, I have to see my wife's face for 24/7. I'm just telling you, I'm quoting. But yeah, that could be one of the scenarios, right?
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think this is where it's very important to have your own separate space, your own personal space, especially if you're living, if you're with family members 24/7, basically. You need personal space and time, in addition to shared space and time. I find having structure and keeping busy is a great way of handling this uncertainty and isolation. I really try to plan my day. What are the tasks that I have to do? And then I'm going to take a break. And sometimes the break will be, just sitting on, watching the birds outside or whatever it is. Or I might go, might have a Zoom meeting, someone, so I can interact with some others. And then I get, finish my next segment of work. And then maybe in the late afternoon, I'm going to take a walk. So, but it's got to be intentional and purposeful. You can't just, how's this day going to unfold? And, because that keeps you in your pajamas and that keeps you, it's important to really approach, I think, especially if you're telecommunicating, to approach it as a structured professional environment and create and design your day.
Yeah, and that speaks back to your insistence that there has to be a sense of control. It's purposeful. I am putting this in my life because I'm doing this. I am feeling more safe. I am feeling better. And this is making my body and me actually move forward in a positive direction. Wow.
No, it's
true.
And I years ago I came up with what I call the 6 R's of burnout recovery. And in a way, a lot of us are experiencing a sense of burnout, from this COVID situation that doesn't go away. So it's weighing on us. 6 R's. Yeah.
Mark, this is where I wanted to take the conversation, but I know we're running out of time here, and you haven't finished the natural speed discussion either. Yeah. Is there a way that we could actually continue this conversation? This is brilliant, by the way. This is one of the most inspiring conversations I've had between groups of people in a while. I'm always inspired by my one-on-one conversations, but as a group, this is fascinating that we're all resonating with the same topic.
We have different cultural perspectives with the three of us. I mean, it's great. It really is. Sure. I call this breathing enriched oxygen, this kind of discussion. So sign me up.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm running out of time. My schedule ordains me to go in different directions, but please let's go ahead and see. I would really enjoy both Kumar and Mark your input into burnout recovery, because I've been working from home 100% of the time since 2013, and I've been burnt out about 3 or 4 times. And I'd like to explore, more efficient and more effective ways to actually hit bottom and then build back up in a healthy way.
And you know what? I think COVID is providing that. I see a lot of people realizing that they have to examine the basic foundations of their operational systems, so to speak.
True. So how about this, Mark? If we could, come again live on next Thursday, same time. I have plenty of questions that is still left in the table.
I think it's good. I'll just quickly check my schedule, but I'm pretty sure it looks good.
Yeah, and then there is your shrink wrap is also due, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Of course. Hey, we definitely have to get in a shrink wrap.
Yeah.
As I tell people, I'm pioneering the field of psychologically humorous rap music, and as a therapist, calling it, of course, shrink wrap production. So
yes.
And as I say, it only takes about 2 hours for the effects to wear off. So,
wow.
Brilliant, very brilliant.
And maybe we can talk about just this. How do you kind of laugh at yourself? How do you kind of use humor as a way of, sort of like what Tim was saying, realize that what's out there isn't as scary as it seems many times.
No, absolutely. I mean, we need to keep up the humor up and running. And so, check your schedule. And if we could do it Thursday, coming Thursday again, with your shrink wrap, obviously, that would be fabulous. And
I'll be practicing.
And if we can't make it next Thursday, we'll announce. Everyone will announce when we have this next conversation, because again, this is something that everybody should be participating in a question and answer discussion. We know we need to talk about this. Let's do it.
Sounds great. Okay, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, it has. Kumar, I want to thank you so much for pulling this together. This is a treat to talk to all of these fellow travelers that we have going on here. Mark, it's a real pleasure. I may have to drop out very quickly here, but I'm looking forward to. Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk both behind the screen and in front of the screen with both of you.
I like our synergy. Okay.
All right. I completely agree with Tim. It's been a pleasure, my pleasure as well. And I look forward to again bringing all 3 of us together on Thursday until we come up with a new day.
Or whatever works. Okay.
But thank you people for watching in. Yeah, thank you people for watching in, and stay tuned. We'll have Mark again on our live show. Till then, thank you. Live stress-free. There's nothing to be stressed so far. I mean, keep the humor on. Thank you so much, and take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you.